It always gets me, like how we're always trying to figure out these huge questions, like where did everything come from? And how old is the universe and all that? And it's so interesting how often the creation story, like from, religious traditions and then the scientific timeline of the universe just seem like they're in two completely different worlds.
Right.
But what if they weren't?
Yeah.
Like, what if they were actually kind of telling a similar story?
Exactly.
But just in totally different ways.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to deep dive into today.
I like that.
This idea that these two big narratives could actually be connected. And we're basing this on a couple of excerpts that we've been looking at.
Yeah.
They're pretty fascinating.
Okay.
So basically, we're going to look at this idea. Could the biblical idea of a day, like in the creation story, actually represent a much longer period of time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like way more than just a normal 24-hour day.
That's one of the things that always gets me.
Yeah.
When you read those creation accounts, it's like, okay, a day.
Right.
What does a day really mean? That's what's so cool about these sources you shared.
Yeah.
They're really exploring this thought-provoking angle, this idea that a day, biblically, could represent something so much bigger.
Yeah.
Could be epochs, vast periods of time. It's like a whole new way to think about how those religious traditions might connect with what we're learning from science today.
Absolutely.
It's a potential bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the big question here that we're really digging into is this.
Okay.
Could those 6 days in the Bible actually symbolize huge epochs?
Yeah.
Like massive stages in how the entire cosmos and our planet were transformed. And we're talking millions, even hundreds of millions of years for each day.
That's the idea.
And these sources we have, they don't just kind of mention this. They really get into it.
They go deep.
They explore this interpretation as a possible way to make these two seemingly different accounts.
It's like they're trying to harmonize them.
Yeah.
Bring them together.
Yeah.
And you know what I find really interesting about the perspective in these texts?
Okay.
Is that they're not trying to say that either the scriptures or scientific findings are wrong.
Right.
They're not saying either one has to be tossed out.
Right.
It's more like they're suggesting a way to understand the timeline in the Bible that could actually work with the idea that the universe is billions of years old. Okay. Which is what, cosmology tells us.
Right.
And the idea is that the biblical account of creation might have been written in a way that an ancient people would have understood using a time frame that made sense to them back then.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like different ways of talking about time.
Yeah, okay. Let's break this down a little bit more. This whole core idea.
Yeah.
So basically, if we look at it this way, the 6 days aren't like a literal week, like how we think of a week.
Right.
Instead, they're like this sequence of super long periods.
Yeah, massive chunks of time.
Yeah, each day is like a huge phase in how the universe and the earth develop.
It's like a whole chapter.
And we could be talking, like you said, epochs.
Right.
Like eons.
Mind-blowing, right.
It is.
I mean, think about it. It allows us to see these accounts, the scientific and the religious ones, not as like rivals, but as different perspectives on this incredible story of how everything came to be. Yeah. Instead of saying, okay, 6 literal days versus billions of years, we can look at those days as symbolic, like markers representing these major stages of development. It's like maybe ancient texts use metaphorical language, and that's something we need to consider.
That's a really good point.
Different ways of expressing profound truths. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
So the sources we have, they actually look at how these 6 days might line up with what science tells us about how the earth developed.
Okay. I'm following you.
So let's start at the beginning.
Sure.
Day 1.
Okay.
The creation of light.
Yeah. Light.
How could that connect to the Big Bang?
Well, if we think about the big picture of cosmology, how science describes the beginning of the universe, the idea of light emerging on day 1, it's kind of a parallel to the Big Bang.
Okay.
The Big Bang was this incredibly hot, dense state that expanded super rapidly and then cooled down. And eventually that led to the formation of light and all the basic particles. So the language is different, obviously. One is poetic and one is scientific. But the basic idea of light being this like fundamental thing that shows up at the very beginning of everything.
Right.
I mean, it kind of resonates.
Yeah, it does. It makes you think.
Yeah, for sure.
Then you have the next few days
where
it talks about separating the waters and the formation of land.
Yeah.
how do the sources interpret those in this context of these vast timescales?
Well, the text suggests that these days could represent those super long and really gradual processes of how planets form. So like the separation of waters from the land, that could be a symbol for the early Earth cooling down. And then all the water vapor in the air condensing and forming the oceans. And then you have land masses emerging. And that aligns with the geological stuff, the continental drift, the tectonic plates moving around, all that stuff that happened over hundreds of millions of years. It wasn't like boom, sudden changes. It was these long, drawn-out transformations.
Geology tells us it took forever.
Forever. And then, of course, you get to the appearance of life, plants and animals. And then finally humans. How does that fit into this whole day interpretation?
How does that line up?
This is where it gets really interesting. Because the Bible describes things in this broad sequence, from simple life forms to more and more complex ones until you get to humans. And that actually mirrors what science tells us about evolution. Life on Earth started simple and gradually got more diverse and complex.
Over billions of years.
Exactly, billions of years. The sources aren't saying that the Bible is like a step-by-step scientific textbook. It's more like a narrative that captures the general direction of how life unfolded. So the sources bring up this really intriguing idea, these time gaps. Like there could be huge gaps, potentially millions of years between each of those days.
Whoa. Why do they bring that up?
Because think about it. You've got this idea of creation happening in 6 days. But then you've got geological time, which is immense. So these gaps are a way to bridge those two things. It's like each day represents the start of a new phase in how the Earth developed. But then tons of time could have passed before the next day began.
I see.
It wasn't necessarily a continuous thing.
Gotcha.
Like 24 hours, then another 24 hours. It's more like these big starts separated by long stretches.
So all the slow, gradual changes in geology and biology, they could have happened in those gaps. Makes sense.
It's like punctuated creation.
Punctuated creation. That's a great way to put it. It's not a countdown. It's like these big moments of development. So what about the seventh day?
Oh, yeah, the day of rest. How does that fit into this? Well, the sources suggest it wasn't just about God taking a break after all that creating. It was more like the culmination, the grand finale of the whole process.
Like everything was finished.
The world was fully formed and ready for inhabitants.
And specifically humans.
Especially humans, It's like the achievement of the whole purpose of creation. A world all set for its role.
I really like that analogy.
Oh, which one?
In the sources about creation being like cooking or baking.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, sure.
I thought that was really helpful.
It makes the idea of these long periods of time a little easier to grasp. Think about making a complicated recipe. You don't just throw everything together and poof, it's a perfect meal. There's steps waiting time. Slow transformations happening. So this analogy is saying that the universe wasn't just like instantly created. It developed gradually over immense amounts of time.
Like slow cooking.
Yeah, like a slow cooked meal. It needs that time and care to reach its full potential.
To be just,
Exactly. And it really emphasizes that this was a deliberate process. It wasn't rushed. It was intentional. And the sources keep coming back to this idea of purpose and order in creation, no matter what the time frame is. Like whether you think those days were literal days or symbolic, the consistent message is the universe and our planet weren't just random. They unfolded in a specific order with a clear purpose. There was intention behind it.
It's like a plan.
Like a plan.
So it makes you think, if those days weren't literal, does that change the purpose?
That's a great question.
Like, does a longer time frame mean a different kind of divine intention?
Interesting.
Like maybe one that's more about this gradual development and things getting more complex over time?
Makes you think.
It does.
And it's important to remember, like, the sources emphasize, this interpretation isn't about, like, attacking faith or saying the Bible is wrong.
Right.
It's not about that.
That's a different way of looking at it.
Exactly. The texts are saying that seeing the biblical day as this long epoch could actually help us understand how scientific discoveries and religious beliefs can fit together. It's not saying this is the only right way to see it, but it's one way that lets those spiritual truths in the Bible and the things science is finding out to exist side by side, and maybe even inform each other. It's encouraging us to see these two things not as enemies, but as potentially complementary.
Like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. Two ways of understanding reality.
So if we put it all together, what's the main message that the sources are pointing?
No matter how we understand the length of these days, the big takeaway is that there's a purpose to creation. And it happened in an orderly way. That's what's really important. Whether a day is 24 hours or millions of years, the story is telling us that the universe unfolded in a deliberate way, and it led to the world we live in now.
It's like we're part of something bigger.
Exactly. We're part of this meaningful, intentional process.
Yeah, I like that.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
So to sum up our deep dive today, the sources we've looked at, they give us this really compelling interpretation of the biblical day. Not as a literal day, but as this vast epoch. And that could be the bridge between how science and religion understand our origins. You know, sometimes it feels like there's this huge gap between those two.
Totally.
But maybe this is a way to bring them closer together.
Yeah, maybe.
And it's pretty amazing how the sources show us this possible alignment between the order of those biblical days and what science tells us about how the earth developed.
It's pretty neat.
It is. It all lines up. You know, from the first light appearing to the land and seas forming, and then life gradually emerging.
All the way to humans.
It really is mind-blowing.
It is.
And it makes you think about how much our understanding of time has changed. Like we used to think of time in one way. And now it's totally different.
We think about it so differently now.
So what other ideas in those ancient texts might have deeper meanings that we realize?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
Like, what else are we misinterpreting? Because we're stuck in our modern way of thinking.
Makes you wonder.
Yeah, it does.
It makes you think about metaphors.
Yeah, metaphors are powerful.
And how many different ways we can look at these big questions about where we come from.
Good questions.
Yeah, those are the best ones.
They are.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
It was really interesting talking about this with you.
I agree.
These sources were really thought-provoking.
They were.
It's so fascinating to explore these different perspectives.
Yeah, for sure.
And try to find connections.
Yeah, it's all about connection.
Between seemingly different ideas.
Exactly.
I think there's so much more to uncover.
I think so, too.
Like we're just scratching the surface.
Absolutely.
And who knows what other mysteries are out there.
Waiting to be discovered.
Exactly.
I can't wait to see what we find next.
Me too.